No one thought it was possible for Antonio Pierce to rise this quickly.
Interim coaches, they bring great energy. It's like a substitute teacher. There's a reason he's a substitute teacher. So Antonio Pierce, only 2 years coaching in the NFL. He makes Brandon Staley look like Andy Reid.
I'm not sure that team was really talented. I think the unsung hero in all this was Pat Graham. This was Pat Graham's defense.
From growing up in Compton, California.
You were born and raised in LA?
Born and raised in LA, Compton, California.
The fellas out there making that dollar, I pulled up.
To winning a Super Bowl with the New York Giants.
New York Giants down. World champions, baby. Write that down.
But then facing controversy, Antonio Pierce still managed to land a perfect opportunity with the Raiders after Josh McDaniels was canned. Since the year 2000, only 11 interim head coaches turned their position into a full-time role, but now Antonio Pierce is officially the 12th. He once cracked the Raiders' fattest quarterback in their history.
That quarterback's 300 pounds, legit.
Then had to rip into them as a TV analyst.
Let's play find the win now for the Oakland Raiders.
No. Cardinals, that's a loss. They're going to lose on that day.
Yeah.
Denver Broncos, not going to happen. No, not going to happen. Wow, the Chiefs, that's my Super Bowl team. Not going to happen here. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen. No. But guess what? Now they're not going to do it on that one either. Now the shocker. They're going to go 0-16. They're going 0-16.
But now he is tasked with saving the Raiders franchise. This is the controversial rise of Antonio Pierce. Antonio Pierce entered the NFL as an undrafted free agent with Washington in 2001. He is still proud of being undrafted to this day, posting about it in 2020, showing how you never know what could happen. After 4 years, he would be stolen by the division rival New York Giants, agreeing to a 6-year contract with the club of $26 million with $6.5 million in bonus money, a great contract at the time.
Handoff, ball is loose, picked up by the Giants, Antonio Pierce, and he runs it in for a touchdown!
And it's okay. You know, we're going to accept the underdog role, but we're going to understand at the same time, but we're still a good team. And I've never said just because we're an underdog team, we're not a good team. We're a very good team, and we're going to hopefully go out there and prove we're even a better team.
He would be coached by Tom Coughlin, a man he still speaks to this day and gets tons of advice from.
He's leaned on his former coach, Tom Coughlin, for advice on how to structure his days week to week.
Pierce was a team captain with the Giants and revered by so many players on the team.
I don't think people really understand the type of play and the type of leader he was. He was just doing amazing things that people wouldn't, from the outside looking in, you might not be able to see and appreciate the type of person and player that he was.
He would help lead the franchise to their 3rd Super Bowl victory against Tom Brady and the New England Patriots.
New York Giants down. World champions, baby. Write that down.
However, a year after winning the Super Bowl, Antonio Pierce and fellow teammate wide receiver Plaxico Burress would be involved in an infamous incident in New York City, resulting in Burress spending 2 years in prison.
I looked at AP.
Antonio Pierce.
Antonio, and I'm like, yo, take me to the hospital. He's like, what's wrong? I was like...
Nobody had heard the gunshot in the crowded club noise?
Nobody. I was like, take me to the hospital. And he was like, why? I said, I think I just shot myself. And he was like, no.
But authorities are trying to figure out whether Pierce tried to cover up the shooting. There are reports Pierce took the gun to his home and later gave it to Burress's wife.
I want the whole city of New York to make sure that they fully support Plaxico Burress, the New York Giants, and Antonio Pierce. Make sure you don't just come to assumptions and read into things with all the sources that you're hearing. And I quote that word and sources.
This was a tragic incident for Burress. He accidentally shot himself in a nightclub, and Antonio Pierce was with him at the time and was rumored as somebody who really helped assist Burress in this time of need. Burress had an expired concealed carry license from Florida, but no New York license. Unfortunately, Burress was indicted by a grand jury on 2 felony counts of criminal possession of a weapon in the 2nd degree. This Burress incident was so famous at the time, he even had SNL talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, this gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, shooting yourself in the foot.
No, that's the original meaning.
Really?
Well, look.
2 years later, when Burris was released from prison, Antonio Pierce would tweet out some positive words still supporting the former teammate. In 2010, after being released by the New York Giants, Antonio Pierce would officially retire from the NFL and start his new role with ESPN, appearing on NFL Live, SportsCenter, ESPN News.
My friends still live in Compton and Long Beach, California. They still gangbang, sell drugs, try to be pimps. That didn't leave me. When I was playing for the Giants winning Super Bowls, those guys are still celebrating with me as well. They're going to go 0-16.
You think they are?
They're going 0-16.
They're gonna pull a 2008
Detroit Lions. They're going 0-16.
While Pierce was getting some experience as an analyst with ESPN, he was also trying his hand as an intern with Howard Stern on his radio show, trying to figure out how to crack into that media world.
That's Antonio Pierce. He's on the New York Giants. He's our intern.
What?
Yeah, he wants to get into broadcasting. He's interning.
In 2014, after trying his hand in the media world, Antonio Pierce would become the head coach of a high school team, Long Beach Polytechnic High School, and this would be his first coaching experience after being a professional player in the NFL. This is the same place where he'd meet a character who's gonna come in handy later, Jack Jones. Jack Jones is an individual who Pierce coached at the high school level, also the college level with the Arizona State Sun Devils, and now with the Las Vegas Raiders, as Jack Jones was signed by the Raiders while Antonio Pierce was interim head coach. Pierce would be the head coach of Long Beach Poly High School all the way up until 2017 before getting a college coaching opportunity from Herm Edwards, former Kansas City Chiefs head coach. Herm Edwards was the head coach of the Arizona State Sun Devils, and he had Marvin Lewis, former Cincinnati Bengals head coach, working on the defense. But it would be in 2018 when he would decide to hire Antonio Pierce as the linebacker coach of the Arizona State Sun Devils. And after 2 seasons as the Sun Devils linebackers coach, Antonio Pierce would become the co-defensive coordinator alongside Marvin Lewis. What is funny is Marvin Lewis has been a mentor for Antonio Pierce as a coach of the Raiders, and he is now going to be a part of his staff in his first year as head coach with the Raiders. In 2021, Antonio Pierce was set to be elevated as the sole defensive coordinator of the Arizona State Sun Devils after sharing this role with Marvin Lewis. But prior to the 2022 season, Antonio Pierce and the Arizona State Sun Devils would come under fire by the NCAA, who investigated the school regarding recruiting violations that surfaced in June 2021. The investigation looked into whether Arizona State hosted high school recruits during the COVID-19 dead period. One of the allegations even included now Heisman Trophy winner LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels. More specifically, Jaden Daniels' mom. So while Jaden Daniels was part of the Arizona State Sun Devils, keep in mind he gave a shout out to Antonio Pierce while receiving his Heisman Trophy for the 2023 season.
I want to thank Herm Edwards, Marvin Lewis, and Antonio Pierce. Thank you for your leadership and welcoming me when I was at ASU, and thank you for giving me the keys to the program.
Apparently, Jaden Daniels' mom was accused of helping purchase flights and helping the Arizona State Sun Devils violate the restrictive COVID laws in terms of recruitment. So Antonio Pierce would have to resign after all this. And prior to the 2022 season, he was looking for a job. And luckily, he would land a job that would completely change his life. In 2022, Antonio Pierce was hired as the Las Vegas Raiders linebacker coach under head coach Josh McDaniels. Prior to being signed by Josh McDaniels and the Raiders, Pierce had interviewed under Giants defensive coordinator Patrick Graham in 2020. Who would have thought that these roles would be reversed? Pierce was set to work under Patrick Graham in 2020 and also 2022, but in 2023 that would all change, where instead Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, would be working under interim head coach Antonio Pierce. After a disappointing and shady 2022 season, the Raiders went into 2023 with some high expectations, but Josh McDaniels was even more of a disaster for 2023, leading one of the worst offenses in the NFL despite the fact that he was an offensive coach, and also poisoning the locker room and becoming toxic. There are reports that players were unhappy with this guy. And even though Antonio Pierce was in the background as a linebacker coach, he has always been somebody who knows how to relate with different players. And that is why when Josh McDaniels was eventually fired in the middle of the night on Halloween, even though Antonio Pierce at that moment only had 1 season and a half of NFL coaching experience at any level, he was still appointed by the Raiders with key supporters in the building like the president Sandra Douglas Morgan and then interim GM Champ Kelly, with fans and players upset about Josh McDaniels and his Patriots style of coaching. There was a story that emerged quickly after Pierce took over that just seems so perfect, just like a Hollywood script, about Pierce splitting with McDaniels in the locker room over cultural issues.
Players just unloaded on Josh McDaniels, from captain to player to player. And finally, Josh McDaniels actually had Antonio Pierce get up and speak on behalf of him and the coaches. When Antonio Pierce got up there, he said, look, guys, we have to have our own culture. It's got to be about culture here. And he brought up the old Giants team that beat the Patriots, Josh McDaniels' team, in the Super Bowl in 2007 season. He said, here, we have to believe it here at the Raiders. We could beat anybody. Well, he finishes up that speech. Everybody thinks they're great, except for Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels then goes over to him and says, don't ever talk about the Patriots like that. And then you really saw how divided that building got. That got up to Mark Davis, and I think Mark Davis looked at it and go, okay, I'm going to choose the guy who believes that we can win every single week.
Did you hear what Jay Glazer said about the meeting? Is there anything that maybe we shouldn't take as gospel in there?
I irritated at first because I'm like, this is supposed to be family business. Like, this shouldn't even, I don't even know how it gets out. You know how it is. There's always going to be a couple people that leak stuff.
It was very easy to identify a change in the locker room and a change in effort on part of the Raiders players after Antonio Pierce was promoted to interim head coach. But the question was this just a bump because they got rid of the toxic guy Josh McDaniels, or was Pierce himself doing something special that was contributing to great victories for the Las Vegas Raiders, which included smoking cigars in the locker room after beating the Giants and the Jets? Players who had previously hyped up Josh McDaniels, like wide receiver Davante Adams and star edge rusher Max Crosby, they were noticeably bubblier and happier after McDaniels was gone, even though they assured us that they weren't celebrating.
Don't get it confused. It's not a celebration that we have a new coach and, there's been changes made.
Antonio Pierce was riding high, but then hit a bump in the road when the Raiders lost to the Minnesota Vikings 0-3. The Raiders offense, even with Davante Adams healthy, could not even score any points against Minnesota.
That may have sealed it for the Vikings. He's flipping for a 3-0 win.
This was also a Vikings team that did not have a great quarterback. Kirk Cousins was injured for this game, and it just felt like maybe Antonio Pierce got beginner's luck. Was he in over his head? Or maybe he's just more of a defensive guy, and perhaps he was not quite responsible for this offense, which was assembled by Josh McDaniels. After a string of bad losses from the Miami Dolphins, Kansas City Chiefs, and now an embarrassing Minnesota Vikings 0-3 loss, the Raiders and Antonio Pierce desperately needed to get back on track in 2023. And so out of nowhere, after having their most embarrassing defeat almost in franchise history, they went on to have their greatest victory in franchise history. The Raiders would beat Brandon Staley and the Los Angeles Chargers 63-21, the most points in a single game for the Raiders in franchise history. This would be a game that would eventually get Brandon Staley fired. He would lose his job after falling this hard to Antonio Pierce. Some people were even calling for Brandon Staley's job at halftime.
They should make history. They should fire him at halftime. They should just, hey, we got an Uber X carpool outside. We'll send you on your way.
The question still remained though, was Antonio Pierce getting lucky, capitalizing off of Justin Herbert not playing with the Los Angeles Chargers and dealing with an opposing head coach who was really on the hot seat like Brandon Staley? Or was Pierce doing something special, helping this defense play to an unbelievable level? The following game would be the game in which Antonio Pierce would officially win the job as the Las Vegas Raiders head coach. This would be the game when he would prove to everyone that he could go toe-to-toe with one of the top head coaches in the NFL. The Raiders would play the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas in Arrowhead with Taylor Swift in the skybox and all the NFL insiders and analysts saying that the Chiefs are going to mop the floor with the Las Vegas Raiders. But instead, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs would have one of their worst offensive performances. Antonio Pierce, his old friend all the way back from when he was coaching high school at Long Beach Poly, like we mentioned earlier, Jack Jones, well, he would come in handy in this game as now a Las Vegas Raider, and he would get a key pick six against Patrick Mahomes and help his friend Antonio Pierce get a full-time job.
It's tough. We said enough is enough. Guys came. We said we had a squeeze. It's going to take all 60 minutes. It did.
Antonio Pierce was riding high after this victory, so much so that he even boasted in a press conference that he beat the Kansas City Chiefs.
those guys at home. I mean, how many times has that happened in the last 25 years of the Raiders? Less than a handful, right? So let's go 3. Most of those guys were, gurus, not a defensive coach who never did it before, right? Did it a certain way, right? Did it our way, right? The Raiders way, right?
One key comment that Pierce made was about the gurus. As he was trying to turn this interim role into a full-time role, Pierce was often criticized, obviously, for his lack of experience. It is very unreal that as of January 2024, he technically only has 15 months of NFL coaching experience.
Incredible situation for Antonio Pierce. Just 18 months into his NFL coaching tenure, already a permanent head coach.
And sometimes his lack of experience showed, most notably in that embarrassing loss to the Minnesota Vikings. He also is not a play caller on any side of the football, not considered a defensive guru or an offensive guru.
Really, Antonio Pierce owes a debt of complete gratitude to is Pat Graham. I mean, Pat Graham's defense was sensational, and people might think Antonio Pierce was involved with the defense. As the linebacker coach, I'm sure, but this was Pat Graham's defense.
He's been in the league 2 years as a coach. Step back, take a deep breath. Don't conflate a physical win against a struggling rival for clever, progressive game plans that can win you consistently divisions and or playoff spots.
And it seems like he would often get very defensive about this.
The funny part about when people say, you're not an X and O guy, well, I'm like, well, how have I been in the league this long? How did I play this long? How did I get this opportunity? My job is not to call X and O's. That's why you hire coordinators, offense, defense, and special teams.
The Raiders, unfortunately, would miss the playoffs in 2023, mainly after falling to the Indianapolis Colts. It was still a close game, 20-23. But going into the offseason, nobody knew for sure if Antonio Pierce was a lock to be the Raiders' full-time head coach. Max Crosby, along with many other players in the locker room, really wanted to make sure that Antonio Pierce was the full-time head coach because they did not want to press the restart button, and they did not want to see the Raiders make the same mistake of not making Rich Bisaccia the full-time head coach in 2021 and instead electing to hire Josh McDaniels as the full-time head coach instead. But Crosby even went as far as to say that he would likely request a trade if Antonio Pierce was not made the full-time head coach.
That Max Crosby, the all-pro pass rusher, expected to explore a trade request if they do not hire Pierce.
If they do not go with AP.
I'm gonna have to consider everything. Honestly, nothing's off the table.
But when you look at what happened in the future, at the time, seeing Antonio Pierce boasting about beating the Chiefs, getting defensive about being a rah-rah guy, not an X's and O's guy, claiming that he would demand a trade if Pierce was not the head coach, seems like all of these guys must have known at the time that Pierce was likely going to get the full-time job, which is why they were so bold. You even had Antonio Pierce, before he was officially hired as the Raiders' full-time head coach, kind of letting it slip at an MLK parade that he's got the job.
It's a dream. I don't want to pinch myself yet until it becomes official and we put a stamp on this bad boy, but very humbled and honored.
There are a lot of hot head coaching candidates in the 2024 offseason. Mike Vrabel, former Tennessee Titans head coach, was available. Jim Harbaugh, Michigan head coach, former Niners head coach, is available. You even had Bill Belichick available, along with Pete Carroll, who seems to be willing to coach for another team after being demoted by the Seattle Seahawks. You have all these candidates and also coordinator candidates like Ben Johnson, all available in the 2024 offseason, despite the fact that all these coaches were available. Mark Davis, after interviewing pretty much nobody, would make Antonio Pierce the full-time head coach of the Raiders. The only head coaching interviews that Raiders owner Mark Davis had was with Leslie Frazier, former Vikings head coach, who was unemployed the year prior. The Raiders also interviewed Chris Richard, a former Saints co-defensive coordinator, who was unemployed the year prior. Neither of these seemed like real interviews, especially because the Raiders had to comply with the Rooney Rule, which requires 2 interviews with external minority candidates. So it seemed like Mark Davis knew he was going to hire Antonio Pierce the entire time. And even though he doesn't have all the experience in the world, he still got some of the best experience you could possibly have, which is being a head coach of an NFL team, the Raiders, for at least 9 games. And with the success of coaches like Mike Tomlin and now the rise of head coach of the Lions, Dan Campbell, it seems like the future of NFL head coaching could be a guy who's more of a delegator, not necessarily an X's and O's guru on either side of the football. And Mark Davis, after after spending tons of money on great players like Devontae Adams and Max Crosby, seems to be hesitant to press the rebuild button yet again. It's just that Josh McDaniels was such a nightmare. So now Mark Davis is taking a gamble. He's rolling the dice. He's in Las Vegas after all. Could Antonio Pierce be a diamond in the rough historic head coach? Could he be just like John Madden, a former linebacker coach who had less than 2 years of experience of coaching at the NFL level, but then went on to be one of the greatest Raiders head coaches of all time? Mark Davis is taking this risk. It could blow up. It could be a complete disaster. It could lead to people questioning the fact that Mark Davis listened to the players and listened to the fans. Or it could be one of the most brilliant moves of all time. Only time will tell what will happen with Antonio Pierce. If you're still watching at this point in the video, we really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content from me, Wi-Fi Willie, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this video. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.